Good afternoon, everybody. It is November 15th, 2023, another day of cheating winter. It really feels good.
That's a good way to say it.
12:33 p.m. And we are, of course, at Metropolitan Council Chambers. Call the meeting to order and entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, you got an abundant number of people to
Whatever
pick
you
from
need.
with a high level of enthusiasm
Choice.
about
Throw a name.
approving the agenda. All right, we got a motion and a second on approving the agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Wow, we're right up there with level of enthusiasm. So now, public, anybody from the public wish to address the tab on a matter of concern to them? Okay, don't see anybody coming forward, don't hear anything. We'll move on to the chair's report. First of all, I was seeing Member Payne sit down and made me think, yeah, there are congratulations in order on reelection activities.
Yeah.
If you were reelected or newly, reelected, raise your hand if you're an elected official member, other than Member Payne. All right, congratulations. Good to have you continuing on, and Member Koski as well. So, and then I can give you a quick update on a couple of different things. So remember that this is a time of the year when we're looking for members for the TAB Exec Committee. So by statute, we've got 2 county members, one from a city of the first class. No offense to all of us in the suburbs, but that's Minneapolis and St. Paul.
We are offending you.
But it does make you feel a little bit lesser city. So we need one from Minneapolis to St. Paul, and then 2 city reps, 1 citizen rep, 1 modal rep, or remaining agencies. So if you're interested in the TAB Exec Committee, whether you're on there now or would entertain being on the Exec Committee, let Elaine know. And you noticed Elaine missing today. Her dad's in hospice.
Oh.
So she emailed this morning saying he was in that kind of 3 to 10 day cycle, they thought, of remaining days. So our best thoughts to Elaine. And you might drop her a note if you have time to do so, and just tell her you're thinking about her. And then, let's see, what else I can tell you about. We've had a couple of meetings of that Met Council task force, that legislative task force that was set up to look at potential reformation or change in the form of governance that we have on a metropolitan region-wide basis. We went through that phase I told you about where they were getting backgrounding, all the legislators that were on the task force, some that knew something about the Met Council, but a lot of them didn't have the sort of backgrounds that all of us have. So they've been educated there, and now we're starting to look at alternative models from around the country. And last meeting we had, second to the last meeting, we had Lynn Peterson, who is president of the Metro Council in Portland, with us to talk about their model. And then I've got the former mayor of Portland that's going to give his opinion on their model here at one of our upcoming meetings. And then they're going to start out with some public input in different locations as well. So be alert for that if you wish to weigh in on metropolitan governance model. And then just a reminder to everybody, especially elected officials, that we're in the second half of the IIJA now, and there's still, in those discretionary programs, there's $216 million in IIJA match monies that are going to be available, or not match monies, but money available. And MnDOT will match up to $10 million per project. So keep that in mind as your cities think about things. We've had about 93 projects in the state so far that have some IIJA grant funding attached to them. And we just had a U.S. Conference of Mayors conversation about that activity through the first 2 years in conjunction with, they've got a partnership, USCM, with Bloomberg Philanthropies. And so Bloomberg runs that local infrastructure hub. And that's a good place to go if you wanted to go to infrastructure boot camp on IIJA. Just look on the Bloomberg Philanthropies website. And I think, let's see, oh, yeah, one more thing. Deb Barber, we had the, the Center for Transportation Studies on November 3rd, had one in a series of events that they've been conducting on the path to a better public realm. And Deb Barber was the moderator for a panel that I happened to be on that was called Investing in Partnerships. And that was composed of, in addition to me, Leslie Canderas, the general manager of Metro Transit, Damone Chaplin from the City of Minneapolis Department of Public Health, who I had met him for the first time, a really wonderful guy. I think that was a great hire by the city, and eager to visit with him more. And then Rick King from the MAC was part of that panel as well. And so that was an interesting experience. And then this Lynn Peterson from Portland was part of one of the panels as well on the state of public space. And on that panel with her was Brad Tabke, who used to be on the TAB, who's now in the House of Representatives, Scott Dibble from the Senate. I guess Scott wasn't there. Irene Fernando, and our own Trista Martinson, chair of the Ramsey County Board, was part of that panel as well. So thanks for doing that. I thought you did a great job.
Thank you.
On the representation of your county and our state for people from other states that were looking at what kind of people are working on governance in Minnesota. They walked away with a good impression, I think. So thanks for that. That's it for me. I don't know if that triggered any questions from anybody, but we can now move on to, is Sheila here? Sheila Kalpe? Anybody from MnDOT here?
What?
Maybe they'll roll in. So I see Frank Kolash is here from MPCA. Anything you want to update us on from an MPCA standpoint, Member Kolash?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Frank Kolash, he, him pronouns, Assistant Commissioner for Air and Climate Policy at the Pollution Control Agency. I'll just quickly go over 4 items. Number 1, I just came from the inaugural board meeting for the Minnesota Climate Innovation Finance Authority, which is a green bank for Minnesota, and it includes opportunities to electrify and reduce emissions from the transportation sector as one of the charges for that finance authority. So we are starting the work within Minnesota to access the $45 million that was capitalized by the Minnesota legislature for the finance authority, plus applying for and working with the federal government on federal funding to seek additional funds, and then work of that body will go forward about also accessing private and philanthropic funds to continue to capitalize that investment authority to invest in clean homes, solar energy, and clean transportation options. The other item that I want to point out is that the Pollution Control Agency, as the lead agency for the Governor's Climate Subcabinet, is working on the Climate Pollution Reduction Planning Grant and preparing for the implementation grant application on April 1st. We're working with Metropolitan Council, who is the lead agency for the metropolitan region, for a similar kind of plan, along with tribal partners who have received funding for that. We're looking to build a rather large implementation grant request, and just closed our window for additional information and input on what kinds of projects should the state be looking at for the large implementation application that we would have on April 1st. That's $4.3 billion throughout the country, available on a competitive basis. So we're looking for ways to jumpstart decarbonization in Minnesota. The Pollution Control Agency is working with the Department of Transportation, the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Agriculture on a clean transportation fuel standard work group to look for gaps in information and opportunities for a clean fuel standard in Minnesota going forward in the next session or 2. That working group is coming close to its fruition. We have a report due at the beginning of February of 2024, so we're starting to draft the recommendations and the findings of that 40 appointed member panel on identifying those options for Minnesota. And then finally, the Pollution Control Agency has currently opened a grant opportunity under the Diesel Emission Reduction Act from the federal government. It's open until December 20th for fleet owners to seek to reduce the diesel emissions from locomotives, trucks, off-duty, off-road heavy trucks, and just looking at terminal tractors, equipment, construction vehicles, cargo handling, agricultural, mining, or energy production, or marine engines. So if your entities are looking for potential funding to reduce diesel emissions and potentially decarbonize some of those efforts, there's grant funding available through the PCA. That's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that was a lot. Yeah, thank you. Really quite substantive. Questions for Member Kolash? quick one for you. Yeah, go ahead, Member Hollinshead, and then I'll go.
Yeah, under clean fuels, can you comment on what degree ethanol would be part of that or not?
A clean fuels standard would be technology agnostic, meaning that ethanol would have an opportunity to play in the fuel market if they can demonstrate that they have a lower carbon intensity of the fuel that is used. And that's looking at the entire supply chain for that fuel. So how the corn is grown, how it is processed, how it is turned into ethanol, and then blended into a gasoline for use on the transportation.
I ask mainly in opposition to ethanol, but just for your information.
Thank you.
With respect to the grant program, who are potential eligible grantees and how can they learn more about it?
They can learn more about that on the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's website, and potential grantees are private parties and public entities as well are eligible for those. You just have to be owning and operating an eligible diesel equipment to apply for those funds.
Yeah, good. That's good to hear. Good to know. Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kolash, just a question about, so for all the various capital funding things, specifically like VW settlement and all those things that are helping to build out EV charging infrastructure and those, are there any follow-ups to make sure that that infrastructure is being properly maintained? One of the biggest things plaguing EV chargers put out there is that they're not maintained, they're broken, they're not working, whatever. Does MPCA have any follow-up on that or any plans to make sure that those capital funds are at least lasting for a couple years? For those investments?
Yes, thank you for that question. And yes, that is a challenge that we face, and we are trying to follow up them using the contract language, because once the grant goes out, then we execute a contract with the operator, and they have been required to make sure that they are operational for at least 5 years after they receive the funds. So we're continue to work with the entities that receive those funds to make sure that they're meeting their obligations, and if not, then what are the actions that we have available to us at the state to recoup that money or ensure that they take care of those issues, because they did sign the agreement that they'd be operational for at least 5 years after the grants were expended.
Thank you.
Member Geisler caused me to think of something else that your organization, the MPC, has talked about in the past, and that was as you build out this EV charging system around the state using these Volkswagen monies and maybe other funds as well. This is just by way of illustration, but when I look at the map, and I think it was Member Hollinshead that got me thinking about where you can find chargers around the state, I don't see many level 3 chargers between the Twin Cities and, let's say, Fargo up 94, except ones that are on private property. I mean, there might be something at a convenience store that's a convenience store is operating, or a car dealer, and then a couple outside of a Target in Alexandria, but they're set up by Tesla. So what's the plan? I thought the process was that you were going to try to cover the state in a thorough way with different levels of charging capacity.
Yeah, thank you for the question again. And that is our plan. One of the challenges we have with the Volkswagen funding is that we are limited to spending just 15% of those funds on electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And the level 3 fast chargers are the most expensive to install and the most difficult. They also require a significant amount of coordination with the electricity provider to make sure that there's enough electricity there to meet that high demand, that high electrical demand when a vehicle plugs in. For the Volkswagen settlement, we've been looking at the different corridors around the state that we could fill in and trying to apply a 50-mile buffer around a highway and then between chargers to fill that in. But it's a more expensive and it's a slower process. And I know that focusing on where these chargers should be going is also a major portion of MnDOT's National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Charging Plan, where they will have access to bipartisan infrastructure law funds to build out those infrastructure as well, and more money than was available through the Volkswagen settlement.
All right, good. Yeah, thanks for that. Did that prompt anything else from anyone? Other thoughts from folks? Okay. I'm going to give Member Culpe a minute to kind of settle in, and we'll now go on to Member Crimmins and get our MAC report, our Metropolitan Airports Commission report. Member Crimmins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Metropolitan Airport Commission and Delta Airlines have started the largest internal interior renovation of concourses since the airport opened in 1962. This includes the concourses and approximately 75 Delta gate areas. The MAC is investing $182.5 million, and Delta is going to invest $60 million. By the time the renovations are completed, the MAC will have invested more than $1 billion to transform Terminal 1 over the last decade. The most intensive work area, because there's going to be a lot of disruptions, but the most intensive work is going to happen at night. And it's going to start, it's already started in Concourse D and F. It started in October. If you've been there at the airport, you've seen the ceilings coming down and everything. Concourse C work will begin in 2024. And they're going to move the gates around to allow larger aircraft. Because, you know, the C concourse was always for the small regional aircraft, but people aren't flying those anymore. They want the larger aircraft. The airlines want to use larger aircraft. So we're going to move gates around besides remodeling. And then concourse A, B, and G will be scheduled to start work in 25. Now, this work is going to be ceilings, walls, floors, but more electrical outlets at the gate areas. There'll be better seating, and they're going to match, if you've been to the airport, you go by G concourse, 17 to 22 gates. This remodeling is going to match the interior design of those. So it's going to be a mess for the next 2.5 years. But like I say, most of the work is going to be done at night. So we're hoping it'd be as little disruption as possible to the traveling public. And that's all I have.
Yeah, well, that was also a significant amount of information. Thoughts or questions for Member Crimmins? Yes, Member Foster.
Thank you. Thank you, Member Crimmins, for the update. I have a question about in August, there was the joint agreement between the MAC and Metro Transit around police officers on the light rail between both terminals.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you have any updates on how that is working, how it was rolled out. I'm not sure if the question should go to you or Member Barber, but, or what you are hearing from employees.
From our last commission meeting, well, the joint task force is still working. We still have police officers riding the rail between the two terminals. And we do certain hours, and then the Met Council's security forces do the other hours. And right now, they're saying that the incidences are down, but the concern was wait till the weather turns. As the weather gets colder, people are going to be looking for warmer places to stay. So to verify that this is working correctly, we got to get through some cold weather months, and we'll see how that turns out now. So, but that's all I have, unless Member Barber has more.
No, I agree with that. I think everything is in place and moving along. You'll notice if you follow our agendas, we're doing a lot of restructuring of those agreements with different police agencies as well, just because things have changed in the last few years, and so we're making sure everything's in alignment, so you'll see some of those coming through. I think some of the concerns that Member Crimmins brought up are some of the same things we're watching, because we've seen some positive trends related to safety and security on the transit system, and hope that gets maintained, but definitely something we'll continue to watch too as the weather turns. A couple of programs as part of the Transit Service Intervention Project, so the TSIP, another acronym that we all get to now remember. But that particular one has a bunch of different agencies to connect people with services, and very intentionally focused on mental health and addiction services and some of those things. And all of those contracts have been awarded now, so those people are now kind of out in the system, and we're helping those two, like the change of seasons will overlap, and the connection of people to resources will be a little more seamless, hopefully. So,
Thank you.
All right, good. Anything else? All right, let's go back to Member Barber and get her update from the Met Council.
sure. I'm pretty short report today, and it's going to be Metro Transit focused, but we have some more positive news. We quarterly get reports on our service changes and our hiring, and we have some very positive news at this point. So bus operators, our target is 1,075. We have 1,076. Train operators, our target is 95. We have 94. So some of these big constraints that we've had had over the last year, especially with workforce, is really starting to improve. We can't take our eye off the ball. There's continued work that needs to be done, especially when it comes to some of our maintenance staffing. So some of the people behind the scenes maybe that you don't see, some of those areas we still are down. So we need to kind of maintain where we're at. But sort of the really big takeaway for December 2nd, instead of announcing service cuts and things, we will be celebrating 12 months with no schedule reductions and a 10% increase in service hours. And that has shown that with all of the service that has been able to come back, that is really contributing to our increase in ridership, which continues. So, positive news on the transit front.
Questions for Member Barber? Okay, let's go to Suburban. Oh, yes, Member Foster, go ahead.
I don't have a question. I just want to celebrate Metro Transit on doing the work for the operator recruitment. We just got a ton of money for our transit system, and I hope that keeps growing in all the different departments because it's going to be instrumental to the success. So thank you for all of the work being done around that.
I appreciate that, and I'll relay that to our operations crew because they have been very creative in hiring and coming up with events to attract people and programs to make it easier. So,
Good.
Yeah, comments are good too, not just questions. Yeah, thank you for that. All right, let's go to Kevin Burkhardt, who's here today for Gary Hansen, and get the Suburban Transit Authority provider report. Thank you. Member Burkhardt.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and the board, good to see you all this afternoon. Just a few bullet points for the Suburban Transit providers. And those of you that may not be familiar with Suburban Transit providers, there's 4. Plymouth, Maple Grove, Southwest Transit serving the Eden Prairie area, and then Minnesota Valley Transit Association serving the southern area. And I'll start with Minnesota Valley Transit Association. If any of you are in the southern part of the Twin Cities, you might see with the holidays around the corner, we're going to be having the Stuff the Bus event at grocery stores in our service area. And you can purchase groceries and then load them onto those buses sitting in front of those stores, Cub Foods and such. And that food will be delivered to the CAP agency on December 11th. We've been working with Metro Transit Services to convert some of the fleet replacement dollars that we have, convert those into capital project funds. Right now, Metro Transit Services has suggested $4.5 million of capital dollars in lieu of replacing expired buses. Several of the suburban providers are providing concert services and providing hundreds of rides to concerts in the Twin Cities. That's been a successful program for us. And our on-demand service for each of the suburban transit providers continues to grow significantly, and we are adding additional cutaway buses, smaller buses, and vans to provide more service in our areas. Hope to add Shakopee and Prior Lake pretty soon to our on-demand service in the southern area. Thank you very much.
All right. Questions for Member Burkhardt on the Suburban Transit Authority report? And then following on with Member Crimmins and the idea of 2.5 years worth of disruption, I'm thinking MnDOT must have something to report on that's disruptive in nature.
Thank you, Chair.
Member Copey, go ahead.
I'm Sheila Copey. Thank you, Chair, members. Yes, disruptor, right? That's not our intent, but we definitely do touch a lot of people in different ways. So thank you for being patient with us. Just a few updates from MnDOT, fairly short. We are currently, Mike Barnes, who was here, officially retired on the 10th of October. So we are in the process still at MnDOT of filling that position. First interviews have occurred, and there's more interviews to come the first part of December. Some of our local partners were part of that interview process as well. So that's good to hear. One of the important people that play a role for those that have been around here on tab is April Crockett, who's sitting in the audience. She will be departing and going to a consulting firm soon, within the next month here. So she will definitely be missed here at MnDOT, and I know amongst the folks here will be a major part of folks that will be missing her as well. So thank you for your service, April. fatality update, we tend to see that number still growing on our system and the local system as well. I encourage all of us to be thoughtful while we're driving our vehicles, share that with our friends that are non-motorized users and those in cars, to be thoughtful as you're operating those. We want everybody to make it home for the holidays and upcoming here. So we are definitely seeing an increased trend on that. Now we're near where we want it to be. We're at 332 fatalities on the roadways. So on that number, we're shooting for 0. So it takes a lot of us to get there. This week, there was the TZD conference down in Rochester. A number of our enforcement and engineering staff, medical responders, we're all convening down in Rochester this week, thinking about additional ways that we can all work together to get to that 0 number. IIJA, right? That's a popular topic. We want to make sure we get as much money as we can here in Minnesota. And we're supporting you, definitely, Mayor, as you're working on your efforts as well. What that looks like for education, what it looks like for, what's included in it. It is something that is no small task to know what's the insides and out of those different funding programs. So we challenge ourselves every day to figure out which projects are the right ones to be submitting to be successful as a region for those. So again, more to come on that. Education, flyers, one-pagers. There's tons of resources out there. Please, I'll follow up with some as well. And to the point, snow and ice, Deb, Member Barber mentioned, some of the challenges they're seeing for folks filling positions. We will continue to see that at MnDOT as well, and our local partners are as well. So this winter, we're hoping that no snow flies, unless for those that are snowmobilers, of course, want to see that snow. But what we know is we have less plow drivers for MnDOT, and that has implications to those traveling in cars and non-motorized users, right? Just to make sure that we have folks being patient, taking time, being planful, making sure that we're doing intentional trips. So again, if you see a snowplow driver, thank them and give them room if you're out on the roads with them. So thank you. That's it.
Questions for Member Copy? Yeah, so it sounds like we're killing about 1 person a day on the roads.
Yeah,
Not good.
it's not good. No, and construction zones are just as dangerous. We did lose one of our employees in the end of August in a work zone. So it's very close to our heart if we think about the danger of those folks every day, and it becomes normal, and I don't want it to become normal for those folks. So.
Okay. Maybe we'll give that some thought here at the tab as well. All right, thanks for that report. And Jeni Hager, our TAC chair, may have a TAC report for us. Okay, no, she's waving me off. No report. We got some work to do here in a minute or so. Well, let's move on to minutes. Is there anybody that wishes to modify the minutes? Or anyway, you're moving them, Member Lewis?
Second.
Okay. Second, we got a motion and a second on the adoption of the minutes of October 18th, 2023 as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the minutes of October 18, 2023 meeting of the tab, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Burkhart will abstain, because I wasn't present.
All right, we've got some consent business items. We've got some projects aggregated as we've been doing recently with respect to Streamlined matters. Those are in 2023-51. They're still worthy of a conversation, I think, and some guidance from our TAC chair. And so Jeni Hager, we welcome you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So 2023-51 is a streamlined tip amendment. It's related to 4 different projects, adjusting costs and scope in the 2024 to 2027 tip. The first is a Dakota County project on CASA 32 in Egan. And so this will add a signal replacement along with the local funding to the resurfacing project. It's not a regional solicitation project. The second is a project with 3 Rivers Park District's Rush Creek Trail Underpass project. They want to add additional local funding to that project, which is also not a regional solicitation project. The third is a MnDOT project on Highway 101 in Chanhassen and Eden Prairie. The request is to add an overhead rapid rectangle flashing beacon at West 192nd Avenue and increase the federal and state funding accordingly. This is also not a regional solicitation project. And the fourth is a request to combine two regional solicitation projects into a single project in the TIP. So the amendment would remove Hennepin County's Vernon Avenue Bridge Replacement Project and combine it with Edina's Vernon Avenue Reconstruction Project, and the resulting project will be managed by the city of Edina. So these amendments were unanimously approved by TAC, and the recommended motion is that TAB adopt the amendment to the 24 to 27 TIP for these four projects.
Very good. Thanks for that succinct and good report. Questions for Chair Hager on these matters that are streamlined? Is there a motion to adopt Action Transmittal 2023-51? Commissioner, we got Commissioner Gattel. Who was the seconder? Okay, very good, Mayor. All right, we got a motion and second on 2023-51, which requests that we adopt these four amendments to the 2024-2027 TIP for the projects that were described, those four projects. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of Action Transmittal 2023-51, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. 2023-51 is adopted. And then we will move on to the non-consent portion of the agenda, and 2023-52. Chair Hager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 2023-52, I think Joe Barbeau is going to come up and give you a brief presentation on that. It's related to two projects that were previously brought forward for amendment in August, for TIP amendment, and then to release the TIP amendment and the TPP amendment for public review and comment in October. So this is bringing those public comments back for you all to consider. So, Joe.
All right. Thank you, Chair Hager.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Barbeau, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm really here to do, I think, is sort of clear up some potential confusion that we're having with so many things happening at the same time and at slightly different times. So in August, you recommended for approval an amendment to the 2040 Transportation Policy Plan, TPP, and it was to move these five projects listed here into the plan. That second project from Scott County will be funded entirely by the county, but it still needs to be in the TPP and the TIP for that matter, because it's an interchange which is considered a regionally significant project. We had some questions about that, and really it's pretty much from federal rules that this needs to go through these processes. These other four projects were all funded, or will all be funded, I should say, through the Quarters of Commerce program recently awarded by the legislature. So what happened after you forwarded this to the council is that it went through a public comment process released by the council, released for public comment by the council. There were 26 public comments received, and most of them were supportive. Most of the focus was on the Albertville to Monticello Lane addition, which is potentially another point of confusion in this whole process, because you might recognize Albertville and Monticello as not being within the 7-county region that we usually talk about. It is part of the extended MPO boundary that was established in the 2010 census. Because of certain densities that we have, our MPO reach must go into small parts of Wright and Sherburne County. Therefore, this project being in that location must also be included in all of these processes. So then you'll see some positive comments for some of the other projects as well. There were 5 comments expressing opposition, not necessarily to specific projects, usually just general opposition to highway expansion, and discussions about that contributing to induced demand. So this is just an information item that you would have seen probably later on the agenda, if not for the other item, the item that's actually an action item today, and that's the TIP amendment. So the TIP amendment is recognizing 2 of these 5 projects as needing to be in the TIP. The reason you only see 2 of these 5 projects is these 2 projects need to get in there pretty quickly because those who are administering those projects want to get them underway in a hurry, and that's the Monticello to Albertville project and then the Scott County project. That third project, I know these are very light on this screen, but the Highway 10 lane addition in Anoka, you'll probably be seeing that somewhere around May or June, I believe. Just because these were awarded funds from the Quarters of Commerce program does not mean that the entire scopes are decided upon and the exact funding amounts and match amounts are decided upon. So those aren't quite, that project isn't quite ready for the tip yet. You'll probably see that in a few months. The other two projects, you'll probably see as part of the tip just under a year from now. Those are out-year projects. They're not 2024 projects and don't need to be rushed into the tip. So that's why you only see these two projects. So what happened here last month is you released this tip amendment with these two projects for public comment. That public comment period ended last week, and we received 24 public comments on these two projects. A little better, or not better, but a little wider spread of support and opposition. We had 10 supportive comments. All of them mentioned the I-94 project because that is sort of the big scale, big ticket project here. A few of them mentioned Scott County. We had 13 opposed. Again, they all mentioned the I-94 project, and 3 of them also mentioned Scott County. And then there was one unrelated comment because sometimes folks see a transportation plan or action to comment on, and they make a different comment. This comment was transit related, and we will pass that on to Metro Transit. So that's a summary of the comments that we received. And this is the action we're looking for. Again, it's only in the tip amendment. The TPP piece was for your information. So I know it's kind of strange with these processes going through, so let me know if you have any questions on that or on the tip action itself.
Questions for member, Mr. Barbeau? Tab members? Okay. Right, yeah, we've been through this before. I think folks understand you well. Thanks for that thorough explanation.
Thank you.
So the first project, the Albertville to Monticello, is in there because it's part of the extended boundary for the MPO. So let me ask this. Is there anyone who cares to move 2023-52?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All right. Thank you. Member Commissioner Ulrich moves, Mayor Stephenson seconds the adoption of 2023-52. Now we'll turn to discussion. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of adoption of the recommended motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
All right. Thank you. The ayes have it. Action transmittal 2023-52 is adopted. All right. Now we are moving on to the informational portion of the agenda, and we're going to have Steve Peterson come up and introduce the first topic, an intersection mobility and the safety study. And
okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll get the PowerPoint on the screen here. Do want to bring up 2 colleagues here, Michael Corbett from MnDOT, Paul Morris from SRF Consulting Group, who are the lead consultants on this study. And did want to just mention, you know, as you look at MPOs and DOTs across the country, there's different types of relationships between the MPOs and DOTs. Oftentimes it's contentious. We've got a good relationship with the DOT over many decades here, the MPO does. One of the reasons and strategies that we've used to kind of foster that relationship is leading joint studies early in the process. So a lot of times in other parts of the country, the MPO will say, this is our priority, this is the project we should fund. The DOT says, no, this is our priority, and then they, you know, it becomes a battle. But if you have these joint studies years and years and years before the projects are developed and are constructed, and people are on the same page early in the process, we found that's been a good strategy to maintain a good relationship. So with that, Michael Corbett from MnDOT, who is a co-project manager, will kick us off here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Michael Corbett. I'm from MnDOT's Metro District. Been in the planning group for most of my career, but actually moved into North area, so I help represent St. Paul and parts of Ramsey County. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done with this study. It's, you know, I said it's wrapping up. I'll talk about some of the before and after results and some evaluations we've done of past projects that we've done. This is actually kind of a upgrade from the previous principal arterial intersection conversion study, and I'll get into that. But I don't need to go through all this in great detail. But we'll be going through, we did an equity evaluation as well. We've got kind of our scoring and tiering results. We'll talk about next steps and what this means for the transportation policy plan and regional solicitation. So, as I mentioned before, this is kind of this is the principal arterial intersection conversion study 2.0, if you will, renamed to intersection mobility and safety study to kind of shift our focus more towards mobility and safety improvements as opposed to explicitly grade separated interchanges, since we realize that there are a lot of locations where that may not be the most appropriate or cost-effective solution, at this time, but it gives us some wiggle room to look at other lower cost, higher benefit types of solutions. Similar to a lot of our system-wide studies, we're typically going with sort of a high, medium, and low tiering of results, and that's usually based on overall cost effectiveness, based on a number of different criteria with delay, safety, reliability, freight use, and transit all playing a role in there. Obviously, this has been used, studies like this have been used in the past to help inform regional solicitation, corridors of commerce, and other competitive grant programs, and that's one of the main goals here, is to kind of help us as a DOT and as a region prioritize our investments and kind of make the most effective use out of our money. Here's kind of the study locations. We had close to 500 here, and you can see this was, just to clarify, this was not really our freeway system. This is more of our principal arterials that are not freeways, so there's at-grade intersections, there's signals, all that kind of stuff. So like 55 through Minneapolis, or Highway 7 through Hennepin County, or 36 sort of outside of the 694 loop. And I think with that, I believe, Paul, you were going to talk about before and after results. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. Chair Hovland, members of the board. My name is Paul Morris with SRF Consulting Group. I was the consultant team project manager. We conducted most of the technical analysis here. And what I'd like to start with today is some before and after results. So before we get into the details of kind of looking forward, we also wanted to look back and understand how some of these types of investments made over the past decade or so have what they've actually produced in terms of safety and mobility outcomes and other types of benefits here. We selected 4 locations, and those went through both a qualitative and quantitative assessment here. So our report will have much more technical detail on those if you're interested in digging into some of the crash savings, congestion reduction, and some of the other impacts to pedestrian and bicycle facilities and connectivity. But for today's discussion, we'll just highlight a couple here. One thing that made this before and after analysis unique from ones that had been done in the studies past was that it included an equity analysis. So rather than just looking at those kind of high-level transportation outcomes, also taking a deeper look at some of those equity things. So both measurable things in terms of how well did they serve some of the disadvantaged communities or non-English speakers that may live nearby, or those with transportation challenges, but also how was the engagement performed as those projects were being developed? Was there a concerted effort to reach out to those communities and get their input? And so one of the products from this work, in addition to doing a review of these example projects, was to actually write a more prescriptive set of guidelines that as these projects are being developed, here are several steps that can be taken to enhance the equity both in the process and ideally in the outcomes of the project. So allow you to read more of the details here, but a number of the other areas that were considered, you can see both benefits and burdens. For those that are familiar with MnDOT's equity lens process here, it talks about balancing the burdens and benefits. So again, not just looking at the transportation outcomes, but some of those externalities here and making sure that they're not disproportionately distributed among different communities. The one project I would like to highlight today is the 169 and Highway 41 interchange. This is in Scott County and was completed just, I think, about 2 years ago now. So it's not a real lengthy time to be doing a before and after analysis, but we were fortunate to have about a year's worth of data available to us. And I'm excited to report that the returns on that are very positive. You can see that the crash cost savings are down by several $1 million, and travel time savings also in the kind of $1 to $2 million range. And that's really just in 1 year. And so when we start to multiply that across the 20-year planning horizon of that project, we can see it's really delivering the return on investment that was advertised in the development of that project. So we saw this as a really good success story here, and hope that as we look at sort of the next generation of projects, we can find locations that will offer similar benefits going forward. So with that, now we want to kind of turn our gaze to the future here, and what do we see in terms of the needs out on the system now?
Yes, Commissioner.
Can I ask a question about the previous screen and household income? So I don't know what the value of that is if you don't compare it to percentage of those in the region, or, I mean, what does that tell? I mean, it doesn't tell me much of anything if I don't know kind of what the baseline for the region or sub-region is of the distribution of income of the general population. Is somebody driving more than their fair share of I mean, tell me why you care about that, I guess.
That's right. Very good question. And admittedly, the graph that's shown on the screen is really just one small snapshot of that overall assessment. And so what was done in the more detailed review of that was to compare those that are actually traveling through that project location and looking at where do they come from versus the distribution of the people that actually live in those locations where the trips are coming from. And so this similar type of analysis was completed not just for this project, but also the Highway 65 and Viking in Anoka County. And so what we're kind of looking for there are the users of the project, and thus we're inferring that they're beneficiaries of the project, are they representative of the communities where they are coming from?
And just for follow-up, and how do you know what their income is when they're driving around in a car?
Yeah, so this particular data comes from what we call the Streetlight platform. So you may have heard about this from some other studies. And it is sample data, so I will admit it's not a complete picture, not comprehensive, but with a sample size. And then we're able to look at the census data for those kind of home locations to understand the income distributions at the census tract level.
Thank you.
Very good. Right.
So I think the question was a good one. What's the value of it in terms of the annual benefits that you've determined are there of that income analysis?
Yeah, I would characterize those as two different areas of investigation. That the total benefits on the left-hand side are just kind of those top line benefits that the project delivers overall without attempting to distinguish them. The household income is really one of the areas of investigation within that equity analysis framework that was described earlier. And really this goes back to that comment I made just a moment ago about ensuring that the benefits and burdens of any given project are shared equally or distributed equitably. And so, this isn't to say that there's a right or wrong answer, but to really just do that assessment and say, is there a sign that it was not in fact equitable in terms of who's using the project?
Member Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I usually interpret data like this from the lens of this need for us to do race-neutral analysis for legal reasons, which has benefits, but that's kind of a technocratic way of saying There's a way for us to like bend ourselves into pretzels to avoid having to talk about race, so that when we're trying to actually get at some of the core issues at hand, we don't get sued, right? That's kind of like a legal navigation thing. Whereas if we could just more clearly say what are the racial impacts of some of these decisions, I think it would be easier for us as policymakers to navigate this, but then we have to get those insights at a level playing field, and so we're trying to get to a proxy of that, which would be things like income. That's how I interpret data like this, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, in this case, I don't think there was an attempt to shy away from that. I think this is the attempt to design a process that integrates equity considerations more fully into the project development process are still new. We're trying to kind of cast as wide of a net as possible and really consider all those different factors. And so hopefully that process will mature, both to ensure that it's covering, all of the relevant characteristics, but also being mindful of potential, pitfalls or challenges that could result as unintended consequences.
Yeah, and just the overlap of race and class as to how those equity impacts unfold.
Thanks, Member Brand. Anyone else? All right, go ahead and
Mr.
proceed.
Chair, maybe just to add something, I've done several studies and we've looked at equity in several different ways. And that's part of the reason why Amy Venowitz is leading the equity framework study to kind of give us a guidebook as to how to do these types of analyses moving forward on our studies. So, that's an in-progress study, and I think will be very interesting to hear about at this level in the coming months. So.
All right. Thanks. Very good. All right, go ahead and proceed.
Very good. Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
So moving on to the evaluation that will inform the results of this study now, as Michael showed in one of the early slides, there were over 500 locations across the 7-county area, actually including some of the external planning areas as well. So this is a very significant size of this analysis in terms of how many locations were being looked at. Working together with our partners and committees, ultimately identified 7 performance measures for the purpose of scoring each of these locations and ultimately prioritizing them. And those broke down in a few different categories here. Mobility, which included 3 different types of mobility based on vehicle observations. I'd like to recognize one of our partners was the Texas Transportation Institute. And so for those that are familiar with their urban mobility report that's published each year, those top 3 mobility measures are using the same data that's used to publish that report. This was also really exciting to work with some of the transit partners in the region to develop a measure for transit passenger delay. My understanding is that has not really been done in a formal context before, and Metro Transit and some of their data analysts were very gracious in partnering with us to share their data and also some of the methods that they've been developing. I think it's important to note that they also, that Metro Transit data does incorporate transit record keeping for Plymouth, Maple Grove, and Southwest, and so that is included. MVTA is not a part of that system, but they also were cooperative in sharing data with us so that we could replicate that methodology and have complete coverage of our regional transit system. So again, we're excited about that. And you'll note that the units that those are expressed in terms of daily person hours are consistent across both the vehicle and transit measures. So again, we felt that was a good way to make that more of an apples to apples comparison. The other categories include safety, and consistent with MnDOT and FHWA and many other agencies' process now, really trying to elevate the importance of fatal and serious injury crashes, as opposed to averaging across all different crash rates, really focusing on those. And the other exciting category here is this multimodal and equity. You may have heard of MnDOT's SPACE score. And really what that is a measure that looks at several different factors, both about the built environment and the extent to which it serves non-motorized travel, as well as some of the characteristics of those communities that would indicate demand for that, such as some of the demographics in the area, or some of the services that are provided if there's a lot of kind of walk and bike oriented facilities there.
Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for you on the mobility metrics here. As we've been working through the TPP update, a lot of the conversations we've been having is about trip reliability, as in reducing the variableness of the number of minutes of the trip versus measuring delays, showing that it takes longer, whereas it seems to be both business and consumers would rather have a reliable trip that's 45 to 55 minutes rather than a trip that has reduced delay but higher variability. How do these metrics fit into that more desired flame of reliability and planfulness?
Yeah, so these mobility measures are going to be more that recurring delay. Again, the methodology here was consistent with what the Texas Transportation Institute publishes in their urban mobility report, and the way that they have developed that process, it is more of that recurring delay. What we're seeing in terms of these results is again, we're looking at across a very wide, a large network of a large, population size of these intersections. And when we are identifying those that are operating poorly, or the way we've described it is demonstrating a lot of needs across all these categories, what we are seeing is that those are the intersections that people would really characterize as failing. Very long queues at those intersections, having to wait multiple cycles of green and red lights to get through those intersections. And so I will acknowledge that's different than what you're describing in terms of that reliability, that someday you get through right away, but then the next day you find yourself waiting. It is different. That would be a different set of performance measures here. But I think the intent here was that it kind of follows that reasonable person standard that, when they're waiting and they're saying the stoplight is just not working the way it was intended to, that's what we're attempting to capture here.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Member Foster.
What does K+A crashes mean?
Yeah, so those are abbreviations for K for a fatal crash, and A is the most serious category of injury crashes, typically representing an incapacitating or life-altering type of injury, as distinguished from a minor injury or a property damage only.
Commissioner?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I may be getting ahead of myself here, so if I am, you don't need to answer until necessary. So regarding the multimodal and equity, the mobility and transit criteria, how are you rating and ranking mobility if it is non-existent? So for an area that has very, very little mobility, are we being compared to areas and intersections that are full mobility, or therefore we should be ranked higher because there's no intersection delay, there's no peak period delay because it doesn't exist? So is our areas of that comparison equal, or are we being ranked based on like regions, like intersections? Does that make sense?
I think I understand the question here. So some intersections don't have a lot of delay, others that do experience a lot of delay and therefore would have high scores in this mobility category. That's right. So all the intersections, I would say, were considered on a level playing field in that respect. And so a good example of that is that in the population of intersections, some have traffic signals, there may even be some roundabouts, and many have side street stop control or even like a always stop. That those were all considered in the same category here. And so in the example of a signal versus what we would call a side street stop, the main line would not be experiencing any likely much, if any, delay because they're not the ones with the stop sign. Whereas those side streets may experience quite a bit of delay because they have to wait for for a gap in that traffic that's not stopping on the main line to either turn out onto the major highway or to get across.
Commissioner, go ahead.
I don't think I asked my question then very clearly. So there are parts of Highway 65, north of 694, there's very few bus stops. South of 694, it's every intersection, in my estimation, is a stoplight. There's bus stops, okay? So do each of those sections on 65, are they ranked and rated equally? Because they're intersections on 65, even though there are 0 bus stops along the northern part of 694 versus the southern part.
Okay, yes, thank you for the clarification. So this is specific to the transit passenger delay measure and the bus routes. I'll attempt to explain that one. So the transit passenger delay is the delay that bus riders are experiencing as they pass through that intersection. So it doesn't matter where they got on the bus, but the things that contribute significantly to that measure is how many people are on the bus as they pass through that intersection and how much delay that bus overall is experiencing. So when that bus has to wait a long time to get through the signal, that's increasing that measure.
Yep, I get that. Am I not explaining this accurately?
Maybe I can. I think what she's asking is for a section of Highway 65, if we assume there is one, that has no transit, how does that get rated in the transit passenger delay versus the intersections that have transit? Are they compared? Are they not compared? Are they put in separate categories? What are you doing?
No, they were all considered on the same category. So having
is then
fewer.
the transit passenger delay added to the cross-street delay, peak period delay, so that then raises their score compared to other roads in the metro area that have no transit?
Well, in this case,
I think it's yes or no.
Yeah, the presence of that transit passenger delay will elevate the overall score of a given intersection.
I think that's what her question was.
Yes. So yes, I apologize for not answering that more directly, but not having it or having very low ridership would result in a lower score compared to a location that is otherwise equal but with higher transit delay.
Thank you, that's exactly what I was getting at. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Mayor. All right. Member Martinson.
Thank you, Chair. So if I understand what we were told on Monday at our meeting about how these measures are used to construct an index, a single measure that has equal weights of 7 components, 4 of which have to do with basically speed of travel or level of service, perhaps it's called more formally, 2 of which have to do with safety and 1 of which has to do with equity. So I offer a point of criticism about that as the way to look at the primary outcome measure. In the world that I used to do research in, that would be called a composite outcome measure and is generally considered a weaker measure. And particularly when you've got outcomes that are possibly competing with one another. Faster travel may have negative impacts on safety. And so if you index them together, you may be just washing them out and getting a mean or an average that's obfuscating more than it's actually illuminating. So I would suggest that we probably learn more about what's happening at these intersections as a result of the interventions by looking at each of these 3 separately, presenting them as opposed to a single index. So it's a critique of the methodology, basically, is all I'm offering. So thanks.
Member Martinson, thank you. Member Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is really specifically on the total crash cost. I think about this a lot with various projects, and you see a car wreck, and you kind of think, like, how much does it cost to replace the car? How much does it cost to replace or repair the infrastructure? How much does it cost for the health insurance or just health costs for this? So I'm curious what's included in the total crash cost for this analysis, and just how inclusive is it?
Yeah, so the numbers used here are from MnDOT's benefit cost guidance, which is really that comprehensive look that you're considering there. And so I'm sure I'm not going to get it comprehensively here, but would include the emergency response to attend to that crash, the impact to property, not just the private vehicles, but if some of the infrastructure is damaged in that, and then also the long-term health degradation and even medical costs associated with those. So it is attempted to be a complete representation of that, as sort of callous as it is to try to monetize those kind of things. And just for a frame of reference, I believe the fatal crashes are several $1 million, and the level A or serious injury crashes are I believe $700,000 to $800,000. So these are significant figures. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure that they were included, because again, I think sometimes we see just the physical damage and there's a lot more happening. So I'm very glad that it's an inclusive measure for that. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Member Johnson. Go ahead, Mr. Morris.
Thank you very much. And maybe if I may, just a comment back to Member Martinson's comment here. Appreciate the comment on the measures here. I just want to emphasize that the results will have full transparency. So the individual measures or individual scores across the 7 measures for all 500 plus locations will be publicly available as part of the final report.
That's great. Yep. Thanks.
Okay, so to look at some of the top scoring locations, once the scores for all 7 measures have been looked at here, this is what emerged at the top of the list. I think one thing that's interesting to note is that several of these locations are clustered along corridors. And so you can start to see some of them do tend to be along specific corridors. There's also isolated locations as well. I believe many of these will be familiar to you, either because of what you've heard or what you've experienced as you've traveled throughout the region. And of course, many of these locations have also undergone study in recent years. And so we felt this was good validation that some of those efforts were being put in the locations that have demonstrated needs. As I noted, several of these are also several of these high scoring locations are along individual corridors. And so we've also taken the step of grouping those, because really when you think about the level of needs that are there, both from mobility, safety, and some of these other characteristics, and the fact that several locations exhibit those same needs in a very concentrated area, a one-at-a-time approach is probably not the right solution to address those kinds of needs. And so this is an attempt to group those together so that they can be studied in more detail at the corridor level in a more holistic way that considers the overall context and characteristics of those locations. And indeed, many of them have. I think as you look here at this list, that there are studies either underway or recently completed on many of these corridors.
Mr. Chair? Sorry.
Commissioner.
As you drink. On this corridor section list, is it listed by any priority or scoring, or is it just a random?
No, there's no.
Because I don't, it's not by number, it's not by area, so it's just, so how did you pick these as opposed, what corridor, where was the cutoff for not including a corridor?
Mr. Morris.
So the cutoff would be that there were no locations that were found in the high tier, or there was.
The top 20 or the top 81?
There's approximately 90
Okay.
locations across the region, so about just under 20% of all. Or if there wasn't 2 of them, because it really, the idea here was that it takes 2 of those high need locations to trigger it being characterized as a corridor.
And just one follow-up, and do you define the length of a corridor to be considered, or is it the entire length of a road crossing different jurisdictions? I.e. counties in this case, sorry.
Yes. No, no, this is really attempting to be agnostic when it comes to jurisdictions, county boundaries, and things like that. Probably a good example is Highway 13, which of course straddles Scott and Dakota counties. But really, the way that those were determined was, as I noted, it takes a minimum of 2 of those high-need locations. And so really, it's whatever the sort of 2 outermost locations that met that criteria was where those kind of endpoints were established.
So just to be clear, there's no factor for density or concentration because you haven't factored for the length of the corridor?
That's right.
Okay.
The attempt is to let those needs, I think, speak for themselves here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So the final stage of this process was to try to consider what were regional priorities. And so we've attempted to complete this objective assessment of these different areas of needs. I should also emphasize that we did meet with all the counties and several cities that where these corridors are located to understand where they fall in the planning process. Are there improvements that are actively being pursued or a study that's anticipated in the near future? And how much effort and perhaps even financial resources are those agencies looking towards committing to these? And we found a very wide range of some that were a concern, but nothing sort of tangible has been done, all the way up to some cities and counties that were committing significant staff and financial resources to those. And so really the attempt is to kind of bring all those different factors together in terms of what do the needs tell us about the seriousness of the issues in those locations, and where are they in terms of that planning process? Have they gone through some level of study? Are those agencies pursuing some work there, and has a vision been established for what those improvements might look like? And so really we can think of the regional priorities in some respects as a maturity model of both demonstrating those needs across the different performance categories, and also that there's a degree of readiness. Might not mean it's ready to go to construction today or tomorrow or next year, but that planning process has been initiated and it's moving forward, perhaps with some preliminary design work and some environmental study or other advancement in that respect. One of the final products that we'll be preparing here is for each of those regional priorities, which is a subset of those corridor sections I showed just a moment ago, that have demonstrated that high level of readiness. We're developing some flyers or one-page handouts that will share some of the key characteristics that were observed about those in terms of the level of planning analysis that's been completed, and then some of the technical scoring specific there. And that's really meant to demonstrate, so what are the particular challenges or needs that those locations have to help guide the solutions to be reflective of towards addressing those needs. So with those are the products here, Steve will finish out with the implementation.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few slides to go here. Appreciate the good questions you've had so far. So about 90 intersections are gonna wind up in that high priority tier. And you can see 115 or so would be in the medium priority and the rest in the low priority. Paul talked about a lot of these, but we did see in the before and after study, and that's something that I know TAB has enjoyed seeing over the years is the before and after studies we've done. We did show a lot of really strong performance on a lot of the projects that you and your partners have delivered over the past decade or so. Like a lot of the MPO studies, we don't ask for an approval from TAB. Where you do see the results of these studies is usually in the next transportation policy plan, or it does feed into the scoring for the regional solicitation. So those are two kind of primary outputs of a lot of our prioritization studies that we do at the MPO. And so all of those high priorities will be we're proposing to put into the long-range plan, the 2050 TPP. Most of those will be shown as opportunity areas because we don't know what their future may hold. Some may be road diet projects. Some may have a heavy multimodal emphasis. Others need further corridor studies to kind of vision out what that may be. But there's 4 locations that will be shown as at grade separated solutions in the TPP. Those were because they were a high regional priority, a local priority that we heard from their cities and counties, and also have done the planning work to back up that a grade separation is warranted at that location. So those kind of 3 legs of the stool. So those would be Highway 13, which you heard about today in today's action item or in the TPP amendment, Highway 65 north of County Road 10, a singular intersection, Highway 36 and 120 on the Ramsey-Washington County border, and then lastly, Highway 5 and Eden Prairie Road here in Hennepin County. So that
Commissioner has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation. If you could just move it back to one slide. So if we got into those other maps, as far as Washington County, there was some study on 36 and a little section of 61. So I'm not going to get into, not much was studied in Washington County, but that's fine. But what I was very happy to see, though, is that this trunk highway 36 at 120 is our highest bonding priority right now for some planning and study, design money, $3 million ask. So by you doing this study and it showing up in your analysis, we can use this to help us get the bonding money. So I really appreciate that. I wanted to point that out.
Sure, thank you. Appreciate that.
And with those that, from a multimodal effect, this is a at-grade intersection, which is targeted for interchange, and there's been a lot of fatalities, not in recent years, but it will provide biking and walking opportunities. It will connect Hennepin and Ramsey County. It will connect multiple cities. So it's really I just wanted to point out there's a lot of facets besides the automobile in it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank
Go
you.
ahead, Steve.
And that almost gets at the last bullet point on this next slide, Commissioner, which is one of the great things about these studies is our local partners will take the study results. It's already been done on Highway 55, which, as you saw, it showed up on a lot of these maps here, west of downtown all the way out to Medina. And they'll use those as they pursue funding, as studies. And in this case, we've already had, MnDOT's already used the study results, and when they're pursued their Reconnecting Communities application that they recently submitted and said, okay, this was a high priority both for the Metro District, MnDOT, and for the MPO, and that carries some weight across a number of areas. So thanks for that comment. A few last notes here. The solicitation is really instrumental in funding a lot of these projects. Oftentimes it's the first dollars in, so I think that's always a good thing that your decisions here are really picking the projects and then they're leveraging that money to pursue others. We also heard from our partners that these projects are getting more and more expensive across the board. And you can see the number of funding sources, particularly on the interchange projects, are getting to be double digits, and that's getting tougher and tougher for our local partners to manage. And we're certainly hearing that from our cities and counties that having a dozen funding sources like we heard last month here on Highway 65, it's really, it takes almost a full-time person to manage the money and the eligibilities and everything, so. So the last slide here, again, the solicitation is an important part of these projects. We heard that from our partners, but for both kind of the interchange projects, the at-grade solutions, and really across the board for a lot of our studies, one thing that I think will come up in the regional solicitation evaluation is, are we funding too small a percentage of those total project costs? And it's not just the interchanges, it's really a lot of our projects. We've held pretty tight on that maximum award, and the project cost keeps going like this. And at some point, you've got too big a gap to make up for our local partners. So we heard that in this study, and I think that probably flows to a broader set of project types across the board. So. With that, thank you for your time, and we'll take any final questions here.
Yes, there'll be a few, I'm sure. Member Hollinshead.
Yeah, I am looking at top scoring locations, that map, if you could get that back. And you'll notice the red triangles, which means there's no planning going on, are still, there's 5 of them, looks like there's 5 of them on Hiawatha, of which 3 are in the top 20 top scoring locations. There's no planning going on. So I have a couple questions. Where do pedestrian bridges fall in the grade separation? Is that viewed as a form of grade separation? Or is it only road separated from road?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. So one key point here is that we did not propose solutions, and I think you heard that in the, for the most part, most of these locations will remain at grade, but some of these locations, maybe Hiawatha is one of them, could yield maybe the solution that comes out of a corridor study is a grade separated pedestrian project, and so I think that's a plausible solution set.
I think it would be useful if pedestrian bridges were incorporated somehow into the definition of grade separation, because walking is a mode of transportation. So in particular, at 46th Street, we have the A line and we have a number of other buses trying to connect with the Blue Line. And I've said this before, but I can't count the number of times I've been sitting on one of those buses and the light is red and the Blue Line goes past. And if there had been a pedestrian bridge, it might have been faster for me to get off the bus, use the pedestrian bridge, and go to the Blue Line and get on the Blue Line than actually sit on the bus at the red light. So I don't know how complicated we can get with these measurements and this assessment, but I would hope that as this data is used, that some algorithm, some methods, some metrics are developed to figure out this dilemma at such an intersection. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Member Hollinshead.
Maybe just one last thing, Mr. Chair, on
Sure,
that.
go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
So great comments. We are starting a study that will be called Metropolitan Highway System Harms Study that will look at issues, I think, as you're describing. It's a study we're kicking off later this year into next year to look at all sorts of issues caused by wide roadways, people crossing, pollution, et cetera. So that might be a good study to keep track of.
Thank you.
Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Peterson, or anyone, just a question on the studies here. You know, obviously this is all backwards looking, rearview mirror studies, because that's the data we have and totally understand that. Where are we at with starting to look at, you know we have forecasted population growth. We know we have expansions happening in collar counties in some areas. Where are we at with trying to predict a little bit of where we believe future problems will occur? Because right now we've got if we take this list right now and let's just say magically we can fund everything right now, it's still 4 years on regional solicitation before those projects start happening. So we're still waiting quite a long time for those projects to show up unless they build early, and then we're back to the funding circle. So where are we at with trying to forecast out where we think the problems will be based on the growth plans that we have and the comprehensive plans that we have?
Thank you, Member Geisler.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Member Geiser. It's a great question. There is a forecasting element to the study which we are going to look at. I will say we've dialed back a little bit, kind of the future-oriented thinking on purpose. Even in the solicitation, the amount of points you get for current problems versus future problems has really changed over the last decade. So most of the points are going to current issues, I think in part because of the backlog of unfunded projects that we have that are exhibiting current issues. So I think we are, there's got to be that healthy balance, I think, of kind of looking forward on what the future issues would be versus prioritizing existing problems on our system. So, good question.
This could be a good way to segue into your next presentation of something that we all think is important, is linking planning and programming. So, and Mr. Morris, thank you for being here as well. And Mr. Corbett, we thank you for being here too. All right, very good.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I just?
Yes.
For staff, I just have a question, and I don't remember, and it may have happened, but do we ever, for our trails, do we ever do a before and after assessment? Do they get a pass, or do we take a look at what they've done for the region?
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Member Malushnik. No free pass for those trails. And in fact, part of this next study that we're going to be talking about, the regional solicitation evaluation, we are going to go out and do trail counts on projects that you have funded. Now that we have better counters, better methodology that's kind of catching up to maybe the roadway side of things. We're going to go out and see what what you've paid for and projects that are on the system and the users. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Yeah, a lot of good questions today. All right, go ahead.
Okay.
This is our last.
Yep, last
topic of the day.
presentation, and I appreciate the patience here today. This is a short one. We did, in the midst of all the 2050 transportation policy plan work, we did want to clearly make the connection between our policy plan and the projects that you're funding at the tab level through the regional solicitation. So we have just signed a contract for the regional solicitation evaluation. Again, we did one of those 10 years ago, and now we're coming back to do it again to better link what will be the 2050 TPP with the funding decisions you make. So we do have, I did invite, well, you just heard Paul Morris up here, did a great job. He's a member of the consulting team as well as, did everybody else leave? We tired him out, but it's a consulting team of SRF, HDR, and then Zan Associates. You may remember Dan Edgerton from Zan Associates talking about the survey for the solicitation. So he'll be back on the consulting side here for really a 2.5-year study. So the 2040 plan does say a lot about the solicitation. If you do read how many 100 pages it is, it does talk about the solicitation. There is a connection between the TPP and the regional solicitation. We've heard from our partners, and one of the goals of the study is kind of make that a stronger connection and tie between the two. And so as you start getting the opportunity to review and provide input on the 2050 plan, keep one eye open towards the regional solicitation, because the TPP will say things about the solicitation, offer guidance. It may impact the application categories or the funding amounts or percentages eventually. But we do want that leading document to be the long-range plan for the region. That makes sense. And then our funding decisions are drawn out from that long-range plan. We may need, depending on this regional solicitation evaluation, we may need an amendment to the 2050 plan after this 2.5-year consultant study is done to kind of go back and make sure the long-range plan has all the details that come out of the next cycle of funding. So from a high level, there's 5 goal statements we had talked about. One of those was being our communities are healthy and safe. And so just to give you an example, there's many ways that you as TAB members could implement that into the funding scenarios. It could be a separate application category just for safety. It could be the amount of money. It could be the criterion or the measures. And so there's really a wide swath of how these policies and actions could be implemented into funding decisions. We're going to need your help to get there and give us good guidance. So underneath the goals and objectives, the next 2 levels are policies and actions, and we've just done a series of 3 workshops with our technical partners from across the region, and have technical working groups that have been established, met several times, and now we're going to go back to them again after the workshops based on what we heard. But a lot of those actions, which is maybe the 4th tier down, we're hearing from our technical partners a lot of things related to the solicitation. So these are technical experts in this field or that field, this subject area or that, safety, climate, et cetera. And so you'll see when you have an opportunity in 2024 to review the policies and actions, there's a lot of guidance for the solicitation, and we want to make sure you take the time to look that over and make sure we're hitting the right chords as far as how much we're saying or not, or leaving open for the regional solicitation evaluation, this broader effort. So with that, Mr. Chair, I guess the key points there, we're starting the regional solicitation evaluation. There's going to be strong linkage between the 2050 plan and our funding. And we will start some of those committee structures and such over the next few months for the solicitation evaluation. So thank you.
Member Geisler, thanks. Stand by, Mr. Peterson. I think there'll be a few questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I want to highlight just from my question from the previous presentation, when we look at the connecting and the policies and action spot, our current studies are looking at delays, but we're talking about reliability and timing. And so I think the thing that in order to be really successful with what we're doing on the regional solicitation, if we put in new metrics, we have to make sure that the partners know how to measure and get to that data point and get to the reliability point using the existing data and historical information they have. It's really hard to say to be measured against a number that you never measured before. And so I really would challenge, well, there's a lot of great options on this list here. What I worry about is we generate a guiding plan on the 2050 plan that cannot, forgive the pun, get the rubber to the road for for applicants to actually produce valuable quantitative numbers to meet what we're asking them to do on the solicitation. So I think the biggest thing that I worry about of what the 2050 is generating and what we're seeing on this list here is how do we get our folks at like TAC and et cetera to help us understand this is what we can measure, this is what we have, this is how expensive it would be to add that kind of measure, because part of this is also, we don't want to make this so burdensome that nobody can apply either. So we got to make sure we connect these two thoughts of what we want versus what they can actually do with the data we have.
Yeah, thanks, Member Geisler. Other questions for, yes, Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment. I just want to sort of highlight a little bit what Steve was talking about is the connections between the TPP and the regional solicitation. When you look back over history and you look at how I tell people how things ultimately get into the funding cycle is they got studied through the transportation policy plan. So as we're looking at these, these new documents coming out, a lot of these things that are the priorities, like the longer term ones that maybe aren't reflected, build it into the studies, and then, then regional solicitation, said often, is the first money to the table that helps all the other pieces come together. So they really are closely linked. And so as you're reviewing everything, as the TPP drafts and stuff come out, if there's something missing like that, that you feel really needs to be on the radar, it's really the time to do it. So, yeah.
Okay, good. Other thoughts, comments? As we work on the TPP 2050, it's one of the hardest things that we do, I think, is trying to vision where we're going to be. And I was looking at slide 3 and thinking, the language says more closely align the regional solicitation funding with the 2050 TPP goals, objectives, policies, and actions. But sometimes in the process of going through a couple of solicitations, we start to see things trending in a certain direction that may or may not be consistent with the long-range plan of the 2050 TPP. So what if we start to see some of these trends that don't align with the TPP and we need to modify the TPP? Is there any issue with that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good question. The last bullet point on the slide is while we hope to use everything that comes out of the 2050 plan, it may not be perfect, and you're saying we may have to, there's kind of a circular nature of this, we may have to go back and update the TPP based on happenings between now and the next cycle. Is that your comment, or?
Yeah. So, yeah, we can amend the TPP if we see some trends that are different than what we anticipated.
Yes.
In the TPP planning. Yes, Deb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also the TPP cycle, where the regional development guide is every 10 years. TPP, because of other federal rules, is every 5. So yes, we can do amendments in between, but there's also, it's looked at a little more often. And he'll correct anything I said that was wrong.
Got it.
All right. Good. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, maybe one last thing here. I want to echo Sheila's comments. April Crockett here from MnDOT has been a great partner. She was West Area Manager for many years, so people in Hennepin County probably have worked with her, but really a great public servant for MnDOT, so I want to thank her here too.
Yeah, thanks, April.
Thanks.
So we're at the comments. Yeah, I would echo everything that's been said, April. You've been so cooperative on helping me here with IIJA matters, local impact, even statewide, and Charles Carlson did a good job tracking down some information. We've got about 93 projects that have been impacted, as I mentioned earlier, by the IIJA funding statewide. And it involves assistance on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of projects. So thanks for all your good work over the years, and we wish you the best in the private sector. Now, Member Martinson, as we go through the wrap-up, look at it, folks, it's 2:09, unbelievable. we're going to get out of here on time unless Member Martinson gets us in a really deep conversation.
Get out of here soon, one way or the other.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, I think.
I think this is a quick question. So recognizing that there's a great deal of technical expertise already here in the Met Council, right? And so we're bringing in consultants from the outside so this is actually a question for Steve, sorry. We're bringing in outside consulting from several firms on the TPP. My question is, so the University of Minnesota has a well-reputed applied econ department. I've had the pleasure of working with several of the economists who were produced out of that department, PhDs. I'm wondering, so is the expertise that is being brought to this, including any of the expertise that is either in that department or has come out of that department in recent years, people who are experts at simulation modeling, microsimulation modeling, agent-based modeling, and they understand the concept of induced demand? Is any of that expertise being brought into this planning?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Member Martinson. So we do have a few graduates of the Applied Economics School that work in our department, actually.
Yep, makes sense.
And I will say the one maybe closest tie-in is our data science department. That's Jonathan Ehrlich leads that group. And you've seen some of those presentations that they have, the microsimulate. They've got the data science and big data chops to really do some amazing things. So that's been a growing practice for us. So to answer your question, I don't know if we've worked directly with them, but certainly it's something to look at into the future.
Thank you.
Other comments, final comments? One thing I forgot quickly was we had a webinar yesterday for U.S. Conference of Mayors with Bloomberg. I forgot to talk about reconnecting Rondo and the website that's been set up in the nonprofit group that's working, and the Reconnecting Communities grant that they got from the IIJA for $2 million to talk about the land bridge. And then they got $6 million from the state legislature to work on this planning issue. But one of the things I thought was interesting was that there's been a lot of careful thought that's gone into this. And what they're hoping to create out of this is an overlaying African-American cultural enterprise district. And of course, what you'd quickly think about would be if there's that land bridge and that connectivity again, might that end up with gentrification and people that are living in Rondo now being eventually forced out? So I think that was part of the purpose, as I understood, of this creation of this cultural district. And so stay tuned on all of that. It seemed really quite fascinating to me as people were thinking about what do we want this to be when it gets done? And of course, there's like 6, 7 iterations of what 94 could look like coming through that 7.5 mile stretch. So all of that working together will be fascinating for all of us to watch, and we may be funding part of it, who knows? So that's it for me. Anybody else have anything that they want to add? All right, good, we stand adjourned.
Right. Nice meeting, Jim. One of our shortest ones.